Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Kolek still outside the arc. Faking the three. He'll penetrate. He'll scoop layup around and in.
Good use of the body there.
20 points for Tyler Kolek.
And now to the top of the arc. Left sideline, Cryer, 13 to shoot. Cryer towards the left corner. Cryer off the screen again. Cryer's going to launch a deep left wing three. Got it! L.J. Cryer's fifth three of the night.
Here's Marshall with Clark trailing. History in flight. You bet! Caitlin Clark, 3,000 career points. Another forever moment for this transformational superstar.
Excited to be in the Lincoln, Nebraska regional and fired up to play at 1 o'clock tomorrow. There's only one thing I have to say today is I'm surprised the governor hasn't canceled everything tomorrow so everybody can watch this match. Since the NCAA puts us at 1 o'clock, assuming that we know Nebraska will sell out and our fans better be ready to blow off the roof tomorrow night. That's all I got.
Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with you.
What's up?
We're both back today. Good to be back. We are live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Of course, you can join us on YouTube and Twitter as well. Or if you want to call the show on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline, 888-638-4876. Good show for you coming up today. We've got Mitch Sherman from The Athletic at 8 o'clock. Got our guy Brian Edwards trying to make a little money at 8:45. I'm interested to see what he's going to give us now that I'm sure he's got some NFL for us, but
maybe a little college basketball?
Maybe some college basketball. I wonder if he's got any play on the Army-Navy game.
Oh, that he probably does.
Probably. I'm sure he's got something there. I'm going to guess maybe an under. That feels like an under play.
Are you sure?
And then we've got Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7 coming up at 9 a.m. So we don't often start with Nebraska basketball.
Not often. Not too often, at least.
It is I think that's the right place to start this morning because for about a half, it looked like they were going to bounce back in a really impressive way from the loss to Creighton.
At least the 10 minutes that you got to watch because Penn State and Maryland went into overtime.
But the very, very beginning of the second half turned into a whole other thing as Nebraska was up 17 just before half. They went up into half by 15. And then the wheels totally fell off. I don't remember what the final run number was, but at one point it was 31-9 to start the second half. And Nebraska ends up losing by double digits to Minnesota. What level of concern do you have right now? Because as I'm kind of watching this play out, I think panic is too strong of a word, but there were definitely some alarm bells going off as I watch the start of that second half.
Well, that's a game, first off, that Nebraska had to win in the Big Ten.
Yes.
Minnesota was...
If you're going to go 500 in the Big Ten, Minnesota's got to be one of them.
And Minnesota was picked to finish last in the Big Ten preseason bowl. So that was one game that you just couldn't lose.
Yeah.
And it happened. And so the fact that you bring up the word panic is interesting to me because it's kind of leaning that way in terms of, well, if you have tournament hopes, like you may be panicking a little bit because where do you get another Big Ten win?
Yeah,
if it's not Minnesota,
where does the 500 record in Big Ten play come from?
Now, basketball is a game of runs, and Nebraska could find a win here or there against any team.
They get hot. I mean,
you can beat Michigan State on a given night.
Yeah, Michigan State's very flawed.
You can beat an Illinois team on a given night. I don't think you're beating Purdue on any given night.
Probably not.
But Maryland, I think, is a team that you can beat on any given night because Penn State was predicted to finish 13th in the Big Ten preseason poll, and they went toe-to-toe with Maryland, and they barely stole one. So there are teams in the Big Ten that you can kind of we'll dump the plate to the side, we'll get a new serving. But in this game in particular, blowing a 15-point halftime lead is not good.
No.
You can't come out and just think we're good. And make zero adjustment if things aren't going right, if things aren't going well. So Nebraska had, at one point in the game, 30 minutes into the game, Tominaga had shot the ball 3 times.
Yep.
That can't happen, for one. You have to find ways for Tominaga to get his looks.
Yes.
Poor shot selection is another thing. It seemed as though Nebraska got so comfortable that it was, okay, now it's my turn to shoot. Okay, now it's my turn to shoot. Okay, now it's my turn to shoot. Instead of working the basketball like they were in the first half, finding ways to open up holes on the floor to get open looks. CJ Wilcher's passing was bragged about in the first half. And then it went where? And this is not just CJ Wilcher, it's everybody.
Right.
Where is that? Where did that passing go? There was just not enough in-game adjustments to get good looks. And then those offensive woes trickled down to defensive flaws.
Yeah.
Because rebounding became a huge issue. And Minnesota is not that great of a team. Like, they have big bodies down low. Don't get me wrong. They have big, strong guys down low. Nebraska does too. The fact that you can't put your backside to a guy and box out, you were -9 in the rebounding margin in the second half. -9. This is what do we pride Nebraska on being? A physical team that rebounds the basketball, that gets their body into the mix and says, no, you're not going to bully me. And they got pushed around. And then turnovers started to happen too. And it just all, as you said, just got away from them.
It snowballed on them really bad. I was looking back at the play-by-play on Huskers.com because I was trying to remember how long it took Minnesota to tie the game up, and it was under 7 minutes. Nebraska blew a 15-point lead in under 7 minutes to start the second, and immediately to start the second half. You brought up a couple things that I think are maybe longer-term concerns for Nebraska here, and we talked about one of them last week, and I don't remember with who, but actually it might have been on Monday with with Sam McEwen about Tominaga. But one of the tricky things about Keisei Tominaga is he is a unique guy to try and run your offense through, because he's probably, and I know he's gotten better in this area, but he's probably not going to create a ton for himself off the dribble. And again, he's gotten better. We saw some of that against Creighton, but I don't think that can be the staple of your offense. So you're looking
He's not that great at dribbling the basketball.
Yeah, and there's even a difference between being a good ball handler and being a good shot creator with your handle, and he's not great at really either of them. That's not his skill set. Again, improved, but not to the point where you're like, hey, this can be a guy that runs a good Big Ten team this way. And so you've got that issue where clearly your best offensive player has this limitation. Okay. But we see a lot of guys that run around screens and get open for threes and things like that. But here's the other part of the equation that Nebraska is missing. They don't really have what I would consider a true point guard to help get the ball to Tominaga when he is running off those screens, when he is getting all that off-ball movement. And then you don't have a ton of guys, in my opinion, that can take advantage of the way Tominaga stresses a defense while he's moving around. And so designing an offense around that guy can be really, really challenging, especially considering the other pieces Nebraska has. It's not an easy lift no matter what your pieces are, but especially with Nebraska's current roster, it's pretty challenging. And then you touch on the other thing with shot selection. We saw this in the Creighton game as well. When they were down at halftime and had gotten punched in the mouth and they had that weird free throw, like the 5 free throws shot at the end of the half for Creighton, they came out and their shot selection was questionable at best. They seemed to think they could get it all back in one shot. And it seems like whatever the reason, it seemed like a little bit different reason here against Minnesota, but it seems like it's pretty easy for them to fall back into bad habits in terms of shot selection. And that, to me, those two things are longer term issues because you're going to have some nights where maybe you don't bring it physically the way you need to. That can be fixed in season. You have some nights where maybe you're not as focused on the rebounding portion of the game as you need to be. That can kind of be worked on in season because it's not like Nebraska isn't capable of rebounding. We've seen it to start the year. It's more of, hey, they weren't really locked in tonight. And against better and bigger teams in the Big Ten, you're going to have to be more locked in than you were against like Oregon State. Mm-hmm. That's just how it is. So maybe they weren't totally ready for that mental shift yet, but that's fixable in season. I don't know how you redesign an offense around Casey mid-season. I don't know if you've got guys that have questionable shot selection, that's a super hard habit to break.
Well, and along those same lines, there was a point in that game where Hoiberg had the ability to draw something up during a timeout. And I'm trying to remember who took the shot. I think it was Rink Mass. Mm-hmm. They come out of the timeout and they settle for a Rink Mass 3. That's not the play call. And they
shouldn't be. No.
And the shot came so early in the shot clock that that's what they drew wasn't up. That it wasn't what it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So there are times in terms of that shot selection, that we're talking about, to where Nebraska just feels like it's either I have to change this, mm-hmm. or nobody's going to change this. And it's a horrible mindset to have. And I think it became prevalent when frustration set in.
Yeah.
And when this team lost their mind, you saw frustration come through, yes, with shot selection, but also in the term of or in the way of foul, mm-hmm. in foul trouble. Bryce Williams.
The Bryce Williams one was bad.
Was a complete and utter disappointment for how he was handling himself on the floor there. Mm-hmm. Like he was trying to do too much. Mm-hmm. And instead of just putting your head down and running back on defense, it was a frustration foul, right? Which turns into free throws, mm-hmm. free shots for the other team at the stripe, and the basketball back. Mm-hmm. Like these are points that, yes, can be addressed, but also should never happen during games. Casey loses his mind just as much.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw that almost in an exact same situation against Creighton, right? Where you have the Ashworth 3 at the end of the half, which I think it was Gary who ended up mm-hmm. committing the shooting foul. It's like, what are you jumping there for? Like, that's a low percentage shot in the way that's going to go up. You just stand there. Don't try and block his shot. Like, what are you doing? And then Casey, as you said, loses his temper, throws the basketball, you end up with a technical foul. Like, you might look at it and say, like, oh, he didn't really do that much. Basically, anytime you throw the basketball in frustration, you're going to get teed up. Mm-hmm. That's how college mm-hmm. basketball is. Like it or not, that is a very...
Even if you slam it just straight down and catch it.
Straight down to yourself, there's a pretty good chance that you're getting teed up. If you throw it anywhere and do not catch it, you're definitely getting teed up. That's how college basketball is. Whether you like that rule or not, whether you think it's stupid or not, you are 100% getting teed up in that situation, and everybody knows it. So you had very similar situations where players either lost focused and then lost their cool, or lost their cool and then lost focus, and it cost them this huge. Because I think Nebraska was down 4 or 6 at that point when Bryce Williams made that foul. It was still very much a game.
It was,
and it was one of those things. Again, it was kind of a turning point moment. That Creighton lead went from 11 to 15 with under a second left to go in that half. Mm-hmm. And then Nebraska goes from being down 4 or 6 to all of a sudden it feels like the game's gotten away from them in the course of one play. There are some things with this team. And again, I think panic is probably a bit too strong of a word, but there are real red flags, an area of concern here for this team. And listen, I think we all knew on some level, like, hey, the 7-0 start, while impressive and really, really great for the team, was not against the world beaters mm-hmm. of college basketball, right? Duquesne was literally the best team in that stretch. Now, Duquesne has currently, in KenPom at least, higher rated than Minnesota. So Minnesota's a winnable game for Nebraska there. But after Duquesne, the best team they had faced was Oregon State, who's 186. That's the bottom half of college basketball. So you look at these teams and you're like, yes, they did what they were supposed to do. And in years past, they had dropped some of these games. So that's the first place you look for improvement, and they did that. But I do think if you're paying attention, you're also like, there might be a little bit of fool's gold here. Like 7-0 may not be what we want it to be. And so they lost the game to Creighton. You're like, okay, let's bounce back. Minnesota was a game because as up and down as Michigan State has been this year, Michigan State's always going to be a tough task for Nebraska.
Yeah, Tom Izzo's a great coach.
He's a great coach, and they're always going to be more talented than Nebraska. Like, that's nothing against the guys on Nebraska's team. Michigan State recruits at a super high level. They recruit at a similar level to the Kansas, North Carolina, Kansas and North Carolina. They don't really recruit at a Duke level because Duke recruits better than everybody. But like, they're in that level of, hey, Final Four expectation recruiting.
Well, that's why they get placed there to open the season.
Yeah, that's why they get and they've stumbled. I understand that. They're more vulnerable than we thought they'd be at this point. But that's still
the talent's not there.
Yeah, that's still a heavy lift. And if you had gone into that Minnesota game and gotten a win there, that would have been such a big boost, because then you don't feel desperate going into Michigan State. You go into Michigan State and you're like, oh, really don't want to be on a 3-game losing streak now. But you understand that it's a better team than you.
And you're at home.
And then, then you're looking at, okay, Kansas State's solid as well. You look at that, you're like, okay, we could be staring down, like, this is where you start looking at, we could be staring down the barrel of a 4-game losing streak. And then all of a sudden, you only have a couple more games before you are in the thick of it of Big Ten basketball. Minnesota last night was, I think, a way more crucial game for Nebraska than maybe people realize, because everybody's like, oh, you got a couple games, you got a chance to bounce back and prove it. It's like, this one was really the one. Because if you win tonight, I feel better about your chances against Michigan State. After the way they played last night, I'm like, I don't know, man.
Well, and I was starting to feel that way right off the bat.
Yeah, the first half.
Whenever we joined in action,
yeah.
You heard the announcer say, essentially, like, hopefully you didn't miss the first 10 minutes because it's been a highlight reel for both teams. And I'm like, great, awesome, thanks, overtime.
Appreciate it.
So then I sit there and I watch Nebraska just go on a run to close the half. I'm like, okay.
You feel pretty good about it.
Well, yeah. I'm like, you know what? Talk about, turning the cheek, right? From one
response game.
Yeah.
Big response
from one
game.
side to the other.
Yeah.
Like, you got blown out by Creighton. Blown out. But
Yeah.
guess what? Creighton can do that to you, and you didn't let it phase you.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Then you come out of halftime and I see the result and I go, do we have tiny brains? Like, are we susceptible to any and all pressure?
Yeah.
That you can blow a 15-point lead and stuff like this happens. Going back to that point you brought up about Michigan State, K-State, and further down the Big Ten, though, and why Minnesota was such a crucial need for a win is, where do you get that win back again?
Yeah.
Revisiting that point, because can you beat Indiana?
You can. That's a winnable game for Nebraska.
Can you beat Wisconsin?
You can. I'd say probably no, though.
Purdue, you're probably not beating.
That's a loss.
Iowa, you're probably not beating.
Rutgers is winnable.
Yeah, but that's in Piscataway.
Not great. And that's a
tough place to play.
Super tough place to play. But in terms of opponent, Northwestern at home on January 20th.
But then you have Ohio State, and yes, Maryland was in that OT game, but they were still pre-ranked third in the Big Ten preseason poll. And then you'll recycle Wisconsin, but then you see Illinois, and this Big Ten slate is not easy, which is why when we opened the season and spoke with Sauter, it was, hey, this team's probably like a 19 wins, like a 19, 20 win max team. And maybe even 18, and you sneak in because you have some pretty good.
Or you get an extra win or two in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, correct.
That would be the place where, because I think you could go 18 in the regular season, and if you win 1 or 2 in the Big Ten tournament, and the Big Ten tournament's so huge, winning 1 or 2 is not a huge lift there. But they needed, Minnesota twice needed to be those 2 of those 9. I think to go 9-9 in conference, which I think they play 18. I don't have a count off the top of my head. But in order to get 9 or 10 wins in conference, Minnesota needed to be 2 of them. So all of a sudden, you're looking at, instead of being able to split with a Northwestern, you need to sweep a Northwestern. Instead of being able to split with a Rutgers, you need to sweep a Rutgers. Instead of being able to split Michigan, you need to sweep Michigan.
Or you have to steal a win against one of the top teams.
Yeah, you need to somehow upset, a Purdue at home or something. And Nebraska played Purdue close at one point last year. So it's not impossible. It's
not impossible.
But you've put yourself in a position to not do it the easy way. And that's what we were trying to avoid. We were trying to avoid Nebraska basketball putting themselves in a position to have to do it the hard way. Because it feels like that's how it always is with Nebraska basketball, right? Even when they get off to good starts or get off to, playing some pretty good basketball, it feels like we get to the end of January and we're looking at it and they go, okay, we got 10 games left. All right, they probably need to go like 8-2, 7-3. And like the schedule
wouldn't feel too confident.
The schedule's just not set up that way. Like it just isn't, and you're like, oh, well, maybe if we go 6-4 and then we win 1 or 2 in the tournament, it's like, if you can get these wins early, you give yourself such a better opportunity to end up where you want to be. And
conference wins in the Big Ten are hard to get,
especially on the road.
I mean, and I get you got to have those.
And I get that with Minnesota that it was on the road. But that's one of the road games you can win.
Yeah, but you won that. You had that environment locked up.
Yeah.
Locked up going into
You're up
halftime.
17.
Those fans were out of it. They were like, it's another year of Minnesota basketball, right? We're not going to be very good. And boom, you let them get a little bit of a spark. And then you start showing your frustrative side of yourself. Mm-hmm. And you know how easy it is to poke the bear in those moments in a basketball game when the crowd noise is going. You're the home team wearing the home colors. You're putting away a turn, like you turn the ball, you cause a turnover, you're going down, and you get an alley-oop dunk into a timeout. You know how loud that building is? You know how hard it is for the away team to get locked in? You own them now, and that's what Minnesota did. We didn't even mention this. Dawson Garcia got hurt this game.
I was just going to say, we've buried the lead here.
Dawson Garcia
is 6 minutes, did not attempt
best player on that team
by a mile.
He scored 36 against Ohio State.
He played 6 minutes, did not attempt a field goal. And Nebraska was not able to beat Minnesota without their best player. That's the part that's going to stick with you, because you're not going to have a lot of opportunities to play Big Ten teams and steal road wins without the other team's best player. That's got to haunt Fred Hoiberg this morning, that they weren't able to get that win.
Can we just give let me get my recreation of him.
Coming up next, we've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me. We've been talking a whole lot of Nebraska basketball. TK on the YouTube stream says they were mugging Casey all night. And listen, you're not wrong, TK, but that's how guys like Casey get defended, especially in conference. They're going to allow them to, especially guys that move off ball a ton like that. I've seen it for the last going on 13, 14 years now with Curry. That's how he gets defended in the NBA. They mug him, and you have to understand that while he is constantly being fouled, they're going to let him get away with it. Because the dirty little secret about refereeing is you can get away with a lot of stuff away from the basketball. Because most eyes, even of referees, even though they're supposed to be watching certain areas and whatever, eyes drift, and you can't watch everything. They're going to watch the paint because that's where the most contact is. They're going to watch the ball, and then who knows what else they're watching. But those are the areas that they're going to focus on the most. So there's a lot of stuff off ball that you can get away with.
Absolutely.
And especially with a guy like Casey, who is pretty slight. He's not a huge guy, it's really easy to be physical with him and make it just look like he can't handle the physicality, even though you're fouling him. So it's a super unfortunate thing. Believe me, I've been frustrated with it for years because I like those types of players that move off ball and are shooters and do things like that. But that's how they allow basketball to be officiated. It's probably not going to change. So like, I understand the frustration, TK. I'd strap in and get used to it because that's how it's going to go.
It's kind of like being on the line of scrimmage, right? You know, you're matched up one-on-one on the outside and just say the corner's like right on you. It's when you're trying to make a move as a wide receiver, it's like a guy trying to move off the ball.
Well, you remember the Legion of Boom, the Seattle defense from like the mid-early 2010s with like Richard Sherman and all those guys?
Yes.
All of those dudes, they literally...
At first I thought you were thinking Supersonics. I'm like, I'm trying to go back. Were they in the mid-2000s, 2010s, Robbie?
No. The Seahawks defense with that secondary that like Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman,
great
those
defense.
Guys assaulted those, like every receiver, every single play. And they were basically just like, hey, bet you won't call it every time. And they didn't, because otherwise you'd barely have a football game. Like, that's the dirty little secret about if you really want to beat guys up, they'll let you to a certain extent because they don't want to blow their whistle every single time. They don't want to throw the flag
game going
every single time. Part of an official's job is managing the flow of a game, whether it should be or not, and whether it's explicitly said or not.
Just is.
That's part of the job. And if they realize, especially early, or if they come into a game knowing, man, same thing happens with UConn basketball all the time. UConn is terrible cheaters. I hate them. They're the worst. Hurley is a blight on college basketball. All of them are. All the Hurleys. This is how they play basketball. They just assault you constantly, and they say, hey, bet you won't call it every time. And they're right. They're not going to call it every time. That's why I hate teams that play that way so much, because they said, hey, we're not good enough to beat you at basketball, so we're going to play something else. That's what the Bad Boys Pistons did. That's what the early 2000s Pistons did. That's what every team ever coached by a Hurley does. That's what Minnesota did to Nebraska last night. They just said, hey, we can't beat you at actual basketball. We're going to turn this game into something else. And I hate it because I like actual basketball.
Hey,
I love basketball. So when they turn it into something else, it causes a visceral reaction in me that, like, I think I would hit Danny Hurley in the face if I had the opportunity. If there was no consequences, they're like, hey, you can pick anybody in sports to hit in the face. There's no assault charges. They're okay with it. Danny Hurley's pretty high on that list for me because of this. Not because listen, Creighton
feel some sort of way, huh?
Listen, Creighton's like 8-1 against them, so it's not even that. It is strictly because I hate what they do to the game of basketball. It's like the old Mick Cronin Cincinnati teams were like that too. There's like, hey, we're not interested in actually playing basketball. We're just going to beat the crap out of you and hope that we can score 40 points.
You know what? Sometimes that physical game, though, is a great game plan to have, because not only is it a tactic, but as you said, it wears on another team. Yeah. It wears on your opponent, and that's how you can come away with wins of 54-50.
Especially if you're not as skilled as the other team. That's usually where you see it, is if you're not as skilled as the other team. And a team like Minnesota's is in the ideal spot to try something like this, right? Because Minnesota, they've got a really talented guy in Dawson Garcia, but you're probably not getting like super high end at this point in their program, because they've been struggling. They're not going to get super high end skilled and athletic guys. Why it bothers me about UConn is they can get anybody they want, right? UConn could play like Villanova under Jay Wright, but they choose not to. They choose to play this disgusting, not basketball. And it drives me crazy. Go ahead.
Well, so basketball officiating, just quickly here to touch on TK and Travis's points before we go to the phone. TK was talking about the obvious flailing and that basketball officiating is just so hard to watch. And Travis added in that the flop on Casey's first foul really seemed to throw him off. I thought it was the first foul. I thought was very funny because they went to the monitor for it. And when they got to the monitor, somebody is talking to them, or they're whispering to each other, like, how did we blow that?
Yep.
Like, can you believe we went to the monitor for this?
Yep.
And it wasn't even a foul to begin with? That's what the official's thinking. But yes, when you see that and you're on the backside view and you see maybe let's just say the elbow didn't go up, but maybe the arm went up to shoulder width, and then you see a guy whip his head back. It looks like that from a backside from a referee's view. Now, that's just the unfortunate blind spot that that the official is in because he is standing in his zone. But the inconsistencies are across the board in basketball officiating. Every call is skewed, and it's up to the discretion of the person and the personality on whether they're going to make calls or not make calls. It's kind of like what you were saying with the flow of the game. When I call basketball games, I like a little bit of physical game underneath the hoop. Like, you can get a little handsy as long as it's not fully impeding on that offensive player's right to the basket. Whether it's, he has position on you, or you're reaching your arms in and you are causing him to put up a shot that he shouldn't be because he had the right to the hoop. Like, there are so many different ways I look at the basketball game, and I think, okay, that's a foul, but I could probably let that one go. Now, this is a foul. This one, let me see how the play develops. And it's kind of like a soccer thing, and maybe that's also what gets mixed into my brain because I'm a big play on type of guy. But I don't, if there is a chance that the 2-on-1 is happening and the player that's dishing the ball to the wide open guy down low gets kind of like hit on the arm as the ball's going through, and it slows down the speed of the ball, but it still gets to the guy, I don't want to call that foul when it's an easy 2 points for the team already.
You're taking away an advantage.
Correct. So there are just different ways that I look at the game, but it's all about, as you said, being in position. And yes, one of the big knocks on officials is they have their eye on the ball too much. Too much. I can admit I do.
It's hard not to.
Because you want to be where the play is. And that's why you talk about, hey, maybe get away with something away from the ball.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, though, you can't if it's a flagrant foul because you'll just go to the monitor if you see somebody on the ground holding their nose.
But you can get after guys if you up to the point of a flagrant foul. You can get after guys pretty good off ball, and people aren't going to see it because exactly what you're talking about.
Right. It's just about how guys are moving around, and then, it's unfortunate too, but officials also look at the fouls.
Yeah.
They look at what's on the board, and if they see a team has 5 fouls and the other team has 0, you will
get
see
3 cheapies.
You will see 3 fouls go on that board.
Yep. You're about to get
if not 4, it'll be 3, right? Yep. You will see them try to even out the game.
Yes.
And that's just not only for flow, but that's also to kind of
for fairness.
Well, it's to stop getting the opponent's coach screaming in your left ear.
Yeah. But here's the problem: is sometimes other teams just foul more than one team,
and that's what you have to also keep in mind.
You have to consider that.
And we had a game where we had 10 fouls from one team and 2 over the weekend on the other. And it's just because one team was a lot more disciplined on defense than the other team.
And some teams play super physical, right? Like, again, I keep going back to UConn and Creighton, but that's a really good example of what we're talking about here. UConn plays super physical basketball and fouls a ton. Creighton is one of the least fouling teams in the country. That game should not be an even foul disparity because of how those two teams play. So if you try and even it up in that game, you're actively not refereeing well. Nate, hold on the line there. We will get your thoughts on Nebraska basketball on that Warhorse Sportsbook hotline coming up next. We've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Wrapping up hour number one here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me as well.
Always learning things.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out because what they call on flopping has changed, so we spend most of the break trying to research that. But let's be joined now by Nate. Wants to talk Nebraska basketball on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. Nate, what's going on, man?
Hey, how y'all doing today, man?
What's up, Nate?
Yeah, I was listening to y'all talk, man. The one thing that about a fishing, I mean, you got to be consistent, man. Just be consistent. You know what I mean? That's all that coaches ask for. Well, coaches going to cry anyway. Yeah, they're going to cry about everything. But I'm saying, like, as a fan watching the game or as a fan watching your team, you just want consistency, you know? And you take, like, that Creighton game that they lost in the Elite Eight against San Diego State. They've been letting them play physical the whole game.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then you're going to call it – I mean, it was a foul that last – the shot attempt, but they've been letting them play physical the whole game.
Yeah, it had not been a foul for most of the game was why people were upset.
Right, and San Diego State was a real physical team.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, just be consistent. And, just thanks for taking my call, fellas.
Absolutely,
you,
Nate.
man.
Thanks for calling. Yeah, I mean, consistency is the –
it's what you strive for.
It is. And I will say, though, there is – generally, he's right. Consistency is what you're asking for out of officials. But there are situations like that San Diego State game is a good example. because of how physical San Diego State plays, it is a huge advantage to them if the referees are calling a looser game because they're letting more stuff go. So even if it's consistent, it's still an advantage for San Diego State, right? That's where consistency isn't always good enough, because not only should it be consistent, but the way in which you're calling the game should not create a clear advantage for one team or the other. And when you've got a super physical team, calling a loose game definitely creates an advantage for them.
Yeah, I'm thinking too in that moment in the game, because I'm just thinking back to tight moments in games that I've officiated. Whenever you are in, because was there a timeout before that play?
I'm trying to remember.
I want to say yes.
I think so. I think it was coming off a dead ball.
So officials will all meet together and be like, okay, here's where we're at.
Yeah.
Let's just say it's 8 seconds left. That San Diego State's going to try to get a shot off. Creighton, good defensive team. Here's what we need to watch out for. We need to watch out for contact in this area, area. So it's almost like hyper-focus at that point, because they had time to think about it and talk about it, versus if it was actually happening.
Yeah, if it was like an open floor play.
If it was like a live clock and you were
live action.
Yeah, you just saw Creighton hit a 2 to tie the game or whatever it was, and there was no timeouts left, and they were just going. Most of the time you see those type of games end in just the buzzer.
Yeah, and that's kind of the other frustrating part too, is not only was that a game where that type of call had been ignored most of the game, but also in that situation, usually it has to be egregious. And again, not saying that's how it should be, but that is typically how basketball works, right? End of shot clock, end of half, end of game, the foul usually has to be over the top in order for it to actually be called. When you combine that with how the game was actually being called, it made it a very frustrating foul call, even if by the book it was a foul, right? The thing we're talking about here with Nebraska ball and K-Say and that type of thing is much more common than that. Like, it is I would challenge you guys, because as fans, most of the time we watch the ball too. We focus on the ball. It's usually only when we have a vested interest in what's happening off the ball that we start paying attention to what's going on outside of the actual basketball. That's really challenging to train yourself to watch. But I would ask you to watch other games, non-Nebraska basketball games where you don't have a vested interest. Watch away from the ball for like 10 minutes. You will see a level of physicality that I don't think most people understand happens in college basketball games. The only reason I watch it is because I used to have to scout teams, and so it's kind of a habit to watch what's happening away from the ball. And there is so many fouls that the refs just don't even see. And it's really frustrating at times, but it is not feasible for 3 dudes covering that much area with guys that move that quickly to catch everything. It's just not a thing that's possible. I mean, literally, there's a story about how, and this is the NBA, so it's a little different, but Kobe Bryant used to read the referee rule books so he understood where their eyes would be at any given time so he could get away with stuff. Like, that's a real thing he would do. So there's obviously blind spots there. Some people take advantage of them in like a super extreme way, like Kobe. And some people just are like, if I do this off ball, I'm probably going to get away with it. And most of the time you do. And sometimes the ref just happens to be glancing, or the ball gets passed, and so his eyes follow, and you're off ball making a foul while his eyes are following the ball, and then you get called for it, right? But 90% of the time, you're going to be able to get away with stuff off the ball because it is not possible to see everything. It just isn't.
So over the weekend, funny story for you, little ref story. I made a call from deep. Okay. So I'm running behind everybody. I should not be monitoring anything in the paint. I should not be monitoring anything, even probably up to the elbow. But it's a fast break. I'm the trailer. I'm the trailing official. And boom, I see what I think is a foul from where I'm at. So I make the call. Now I'm completely out of position to make this call. Coach is unhappy. He's like, why is there a guy down there if you're going to make the call up here? I said, from my angle, it looked like he got him from behind. And that's what I'm trailing. And I said, whether you like it or not, that's the call. And we're shooting 2 free throws right now. So the game goes on and I'm trailing again. Guy goes up for a layup. Coach thinks there's contact. Guy down low doesn't call. I don't call. And he's like, wait a second here. Why are you calling every ticky-tack foul down low on us, but you aren't calling fouls on fast breaks? I said, wait a second. I thought I wasn't in position to make that call. I said, now I am. Yeah. And it's just one of those things where you just can't ever make anybody happy.
No, absolutely
as an
not.
official, ever. And it's what you have to live through as a fan, but it's also the only reason these games happen. Because without officials, the games wouldn't happen. Plain and simple.
Yeah, and you're right. It is super frustrating, though. I've been at it from a coach's perspective. Obviously, I've been at it from a player and fan perspective as well. And and as a commentator, every different role you have, you view the officiating differently, right? And so that's part of what you're talking about, where there really is no winning in terms of being an official. It is a pretty thankless job. That being said, college basketball officiating is often very bad.
Well, yeah, and this is another point to bring up too, because what people don't understand is from second grade to say we'll call it 8th grade, that's all development. That's what that should be prided on.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be wins and losses in 5th grade. Right. It should be development. That's it. Once you get to high school ball, maybe we'll say 7th and 8th grade ball can be competitive. You're probably getting to a point where you're developed and a good basketball player, and you're probably playing on some good select teams in AAU ball and things. So yeah, we'll take those age groups out of it. So then maybe from 7th grade to the end of high school, you're playing competitive basketball. And when you get to play competitive basketball, the cool thing is you don't have to really worry about all of those developmental calls that you had in a 5th grade basketball game, like constant traveling, double dribbles, things like that, because you're going to get good, clean basketball because this is how these guys play. Now, what you have to wonder is, okay, how physical are they going to be? That's really it, right? It comes down to being physical. It comes down to being skilled. And it comes down to, keeping everybody's heads cool. And then you get into college ball, and it's even more of that, but elevated, correct? And then, you same thing in the NBA, but the NBA kind of runs itself. I don't know how often NBA officials are really looked at as hey, you're dictating this game. No, it's the star player that's making $40 million on the court right now that's doing it. But it's just it should be an easier job than college officials make it. And that's what I think people get frustrated about, because you can figure out the game flow. You can figure out how the speed of everything is just kind of going. And as I'm working through this scenario in my brain, it's not hard to be accurate or confident in your call, but everything in today's world with replays and monitor visits and people in earpieces, we'll talk about it with football. You hear there's no way that was a foul or a penalty or whatever, and that's what actually hurts officials at the end of the day, because people can see that they got the call wrong.
Well,
right?
And not just that, but I think part of the thing, especially with basketball, that we don't really consider is all 3 guys not only have to be good and accurate, but they also have to be on the same page as to how the game flow should be, right? Because if you have one guy calling a super tight game and one guy calling a looser game, it feels like super inconsistent officiating, because it is, but one guy's being super consistent, the other guy's being super consistent, but their consistent is different, right? So that's the other thing that you don't it's the same like any other team. You could have a really good offensive tackle and a really good offensive guard, but if your center is bad, it's going to look like your offensive line.
And that goes back to scheduling and having the right guys on the court. But then you could make the same case so that teams would pick up on, Ravi and Andrew, they're hard-nosed guys that call a lot of fouls. So we gotta stay disciplined in this game, or versus loose, and we can play whatever.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me, and we're brought to you by Dingman's Collision Center. 4 great Omaha area locations. They've been family-owned and operated in Omaha for over 25 years, and they've been voted first place best of Omaha for the last 18 years running. They can work on anything from Fords to Teslas because they invest in the latest technology. They also invest in the community with their Give Back program. They make a donation for every car repaired. Visit dingmans.com for more information. Joining us now to give us a little bit more information on all things Nebraska is our guy, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Robbie, how are you?
We are doing pretty good, just trying to keep our heads above water with the transfer portal stuff and trying to figure out what happened between the first and second half of Nebraska basketball last night. As you kind of watched that game against Minnesota, what level of concern rose up for you? Because as I'm kind of watching, I was like, I think there's some things here that might not be quick fixes.
Yeah, Robbie, I went to bed when Nebraska was up big, or at least I went and laid down in bed and turned the game off. So, clearly I'm not covering Nebraska basketball every day. I was at the Creighton game on Sunday, and that was, of course, a disappointing outcome for Nebraska. Also, good day for Creighton, but not for Fred Hoiberg's team. And then last night I did watch the first half and thought, okay, this is a snoozer, and I don't need to stay with this thing. Saw the score when I woke up this morning and thought, well, I guess this group of Huskers who looked pretty good in their first 7 games against suspect competition, they're not ready. And that was what I thought on Sunday. In my takeaway was Nebraska's just not ready for prime time. And playing Minnesota on the road in the Big Ten opener is not really the kind of prime time that you're going to see down the road as we get farther into the season. But there's a lot of things that Nebraska's not ready for, apparently. And just going out and getting into conference play is one of them.
Now, Mitch, changing gears to that transfer portal that Ravi was alluding to when we opened things up. 5 quarterbacks have been linked to Nebraska already in the portal. You have Will Howard, Sam Levitt, Kyle McCord, his name popping up yesterday, Blake Shapen, Cam Ward. Whose characteristics and skill sets would you say best match up with what Nebraska wants to do?
Well, what does Nebraska want to do? I think that's the first question.
That's a good question.
Yeah, and I think that's going to depend on how the roster looks. This is defensively, we know what Nebraska wants to do. You watch the scheme that Tony White installed, and you watch Nebraska play in 2023, and it's pretty clear the path that Nebraska is on defensively. You cannot say that at all about the offense. In fact, I would expect that in the long run, other than just getting game experience and for the players who are at Nebraska long term to be able to have gotten their feet wet and playing for these coaches, that's really the only thing you're going to be able to take away and move forward with from the 2023 season on the offensive side for Nebraska. Everything that you saw as far as what they leaned on, how they played, that's all kind of going back to square one. Yeah, they want to be physical. They want to be able to run the ball. So I suppose you can say they were effective at doing that for most of the season. Nebraska was a pretty good running team, although a lot of it came from the quarterback spot at the expense of turning the ball over 31 times. So that's not good, and that's not something you want to build on. So it's hard to answer the question about which of the quarterbacks that Nebraska is looking at in the portal, and the guy they ultimately end up getting might not be one of these 5. It still could be someone who pops up on the radar or gets an offer or takes a visit to Lincoln that we don't have wind of yet. But I look at Sam Levitt and I see a guy who is mobile but not a quarterback that you're going to expect to run for 100 yards, has a good arm, can seemingly stay in the pocket. Limited sample size. He only played in 4 games at Michigan State this season, but based on his pedigree, what he did in high school, he looks like a guy who would fit what I think Nebraska wants to do offensively moving forward.
Mitch, I'm wondering about that spot, and with the NIL situation the way it is, do you think Nebraska is willing to spend the type of money that Matt Rule said it's going to require to get, a Kyle McCord, if that's the case, or one of these kind of more proven commodities? Or do you think it's dramatically more likely that they go for, a Sam Levitt or somebody, or maybe they take one out of column A and one out of column B?
Yeah, well, I think they would like to do that. They would like to be able to take one out of column A and one out of column B. And McCord, Ward, and Howard are in that column A, where they're guys who have more experience and less time to help you. They're an instant upgrade kind of quarterback that Matt Rule talked about when he got into this subject a little bit last Wednesday and talking to the media. And then the other two, Shapen's been around for a while too, and has limited time left. Clearly, Sam Levitt is the one in that group who you could mold him, you could turn him into you could develop him into the kind of quarterback that you want to build around. And I do kind of think there'll be more that emerge, unless Nebraska hits it out of the park with one or two of these guys. And, we're still waiting for, everything to shake out in Lincoln. I mean, Jeff Sims is clearly not going to be back, but he's got to actually enter the portal. To this point, it's been he's expected to enter the portal. Well, we expected Jeff Sims to enter the portal in October. So that hasn't really changed at this point. What's Chubba Purdy going to do? He graduates here this month, and he's got eligibility left, 2 years of eligibility left. It's not a guarantee. Look at the players in the portal and at other schools who have gone in, and it's clear that it's not a guarantee that anyone is going to be back anywhere. So Nebraska needs to figure out what's going on in its own roster, and then that will help shape how many from column A or column B or a combination end up in Lincoln starting in January.
Mitch, I don't want this to sound harsh by any means, but with that news of Jeff Sims expecting to go into the transfer portal yesterday, it had me thinking, what team is going to take a chance on Jeff Sims? I can't imagine it's an FBS team, but if it is, I would love to know what they see out of Jeff Sims to get him there. Do you think it's a situation though where he goes either down a level to like FCS ball? Does he go closer to home? Could you see him stooping down to Division II football? Like, where do you see Jeff Sims playing football next year?
Yeah, somebody will give him a chance. Not everybody has the kind of resources that the programs have around here that we're talking about. I think you asked the last question, and maybe I didn't answer it about Nebraska and the NIL, and that comes down to how much Nebraska gets as far as resources that come in from donors. They may be in the market to spend 7 figures on a quarterback, but it's going to depend on how much money they can raise. That's where we're at with college football now. And that's, not everybody has that. In fact, most schools don't. So there will be plenty out there who are in the market for a quarterback that is a big risk like Jeff Sims. I don't think that anyone is going to bring him in and anoint him as the starter. So I think he'll get an opportunity, maybe not at the Power 5 level, but I don't think it's going to have to be FCS. I certainly don't think it's Division II. I think Group of 5 is very possible for him, would be likely. And, there are coaches out there who will think, like the Nebraska coaches did, that they can help him and fix him to free him of some of the problems that he's had. And that very well may be true. Jeff did not have anywhere near the kind of turnover issues that we saw this year in his last season at Georgia Tech. Across the scope of his career, yeah, the turnovers are off the charts and they're really high. And he had problems as a freshman in Atlanta But in his third season, there were other things. There were injuries that held him back. There were team-wide issues, but the turnovers weren't a huge thing. And then they obviously cropped up again as soon as the season started this year. So I think coaches are going to look at the big picture with Jeff and see that there's always been some kind of an issue with his performance. But at different times in his career, he has succeeded and he's been a dynamic player. So there'll be an opportunity out there for him.
Mitch, you mentioned Chubba Purdy and kind of the decision that's going to be in his lap coming up as well. In what scenario do you think he stays versus goes?
Well, I think he would probably be inclined to move if Nebraska brings in a couple of quarterbacks. And I don't know that that's Nebraska's plan right now. I think Nebraska is out looking at multiple players at the position because it knows there's a chance that it could have to fill multiple spots. And if it's just Sims who's going into the portal, you have a freshman coming in who's going to be a developmental player in Daniel Kalen. And if you have Purdy and of course you have Heinrich Harburg too with experience now, then I think they're probably in the market for one quarterback and Chubba's going to look at all of that. And maybe Chubba's already made his decision. Maybe he has already decided to stay, or maybe he's going to stay through the spring and see this thing out, see where he's at, much like Casey Thompson did, although Casey didn't have the benefit last year of being able to practice in the spring and stack himself up against Sims and the others. And then maybe Chubba reassesses it in the spring portal period. It's hard to know, but I'm sure he's going to look at the timing there, like consider something now, consider something in April. Of course, he wants to take into account, what his relationship is like with these coaches, with the players. Does he want to be in Lincoln? How much does he enjoy this experience? And if it's a big yes, that he loves it here, then that's going to factor also into the decision that he has to make. I don't want to make it out like, he's shopping himself to other schools, because I don't know. I just know that he has options, because as a player who's already transferred once, he's graduating now, and he would need that. He would need to be a graduate transfer in order to be eligible right away next year somewhere else. And that is the case for him.
And once a 4-star, he'd probably have his suitors out there too. Now, in other portal news, an Uman Mielen making his name available, Prince Will's older brother, Prince Lee. Is this a story, Mitch, where you see the brothers possibly linking up, or do you imagine Prince Lee is looking to bounce to whatever team is willing to give him the NIL dollars and maybe a chance at a college football playoff shot?
Yeah, I don't have any reason to believe that they want to hook up. And if they hook up, it doesn't necessarily, it wouldn't have to be at Nebraska. I mean, not to go all whoa, let's get negative here, but there's always that possibility too. And of course, Nebraska very much wants to keep Prince Will, who was named a second-team freshman All-American today, by the way, by the Athletic. So check out that story. The most likely outcome in all of this is that Princely ends up at another school, maybe in Texas, back where they're from. I know his defensive line coach at Florida is on the move. Perhaps he'll want to follow him. I think to Texas A&M is where that that jump was made. So it's something to watch. I think that's the most interesting. That's the biggest takeaway that I have when I saw him go in the portal yesterday from Florida. Is it's a name to watch because it's a name that we know. And if Nebraska made a list of favorites for Princely, I suppose that would make some sense because there's a connection here. But we're a long ways away from having those two guys running around on the Nebraska defense together.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman.
Cool to think of, though.
I'll say we can always dream, right?
I'm an imaginer.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman of the Athletic. As Nebraska, we're talking a ton about the transfer portal and for good reason, but I kind of get the sense that this is going to be a dramatically smaller transfer portal class, if nothing else, just from a number standpoint with what's already on the roster and who's coming into the freshman class. Is that kind of the sense you're getting as well, or do you think they're just going to take whoever they need and figure out the numbers later?
Yeah, you can do that to a certain level, but they're kind of at the point, or they're getting closer to the point with the numbers that they have to think about it, unless they want to be the kind of program that Matt Rule has said he doesn't want to run, where you're just telling players to get lost. They have to look at the numbers. And, my take on it going into portal season was kind of what the opposite of what you said there, Ravi. Like, get the players that you can, upgrade your roster. I mean, the problem at Nebraska after 7 consecutive losing seasons is not that there's too much talent here. So go out and collect the talent and then figure out the numbers later. And I believe in that to a certain degree, but you can't take it to a point where you end up with like 25 players heavy on the roster in February in comparison to where you need to be in August. So there's a balance there that you have to strike. And I do think it'll be a smaller group. Last year, Nebraska added 12 transfers, plus the 2 who came back in Xavier Betts and Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, who were in the portal from Nebraska and returned to the roster. So, I'm not counting Jamari Butler. He was in the portal for like a week, but yeah, it's not going to be 12 to 14. It's going to be more like 3 to 5, I would say.
Now, Mitch, away from the heavily coveted quarterback position in the portal, where Nebraska could probably use some extra help is at the wide receiver position, the offensive line, maybe even the linebacker spot. We got into that a little bit yesterday. I'm cool with the development and promotion approach, but it's nice to add or to have that added depth at those positions. If you were only able to choose one from the portal, which group would benefit most right away?
Outside of quarterback?
Outside of quarterback, out of those 3 that I labeled.
Probably wide receiver, just because of the lack of experience there right now, returning on the roster. Garcia Castaneda and Marcus Washington are possibilities to come back for Nebraska. And if they end up getting both of those guys who were injured this year, and Washington's out of eligibility but could have a waiver to work through, then they're in much better shape. But you can't really count on them. And at this point, we'll have to see where their health is and what their decisions are. But if you have one of those guys or neither of those guys, then you're really thin on experience again at wide receiver going into 2024. You got Alex Bullock as a player who's been in the program for a few years, and then everyone else is really freshmen, like freshmen right now. Malachi Coleman and Jalen Lloyd played. They're sophomores, but everybody else is incoming freshmen or redshirt freshmen. And I think you'd like more experience than that to help your new quarterback or your returning quarterback, whoever it might be. So yeah, receiver to me is a place where, and Nebraska's had success, more success in recruiting impact wide receivers in recent years out of the portal than it has at any other position. So like the next Samari Toure, who's kicking around the FCS and can come in and play at Nebraska for 1 year and then go off to the NFL. That's a guy who would be like the ideal candidate to come in and fix up that room.
Mitch, before we let you go here, we've got about 4 minutes left. I wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk about a story that you wrote about the Juravicius family with Caroline as a freshman volleyball player on the team who's redshirting, obviously a famous father who played in the NFL. Just a really cool story. And what were some of the most interesting things that you learned about the family kind of through the story? And I guess, when did you first sort of realize there was a story here?
Yeah, this one just kept getting better and better as I talked to more people. I talked to Caroline last week and just wanted to meet her and talk and get her story because one, she's the daughter of Joe Juravicius, and people know that name. Played for the Tampa Bay Bucks, won a Super Bowl there for John Gruden in 2003. But there's so much more to this. And Caroline's the only player who's redshirting on this Nebraska volleyball roster. The Huskers, of course, are in the Sweet 16 today at home against Georgia Tech. So, a timely factor there to get this story out. I knew that the Juravicius family had moved to Lincoln, which interested me. Their daughter Ava was a junior, is a junior at Lincoln Lutheran, won a state championship on the volleyball court. So there were a lot of elements kind of floating around about this story that I was curious about. But in talking to Caroline, and then in sitting down on last weekend, just a couple of days ago, with Joe and his wife Megan, and with Ava, and in talking to some Huskers about Caroline and their family, it completely blew me away, the stuff that I learned about them. And it's in the story. I encourage people to go read it and find out about this family. I mean, if you're a longtime fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you'll remember in that Super Bowl year that Joe and his wife Megan lost a son who lived for 10 weeks, right around the time that he won that Super Bowl. And that son, that brother that Caroline Juravicius never knew, he would have been 21 next month. And his impact looms large with her and with that family. And that's kind of the basis of where I started this, but there's so much more there. And really that's the thing about this Nebraska volleyball team, as people follow them and why people love this team. It's of course that they're 30-1 and they're the number one ranked team in the country, but the stories that these athletes have to tell, it's not just Caroline, but hers is really one of the more compelling and intriguing ones. The stories are all over the roster, and it's just easy to be, to be somebody who wants to follow and enjoy this team because of those personal stories.
100%.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and I hesitate to say cool story, but it is kind of cool, her role that she's played, and her, you mentioned her being a super highly touted recruit, and you might think, hey, she'd have a really hard time dealing with the disappointment of not playing this year, but then you kind of realize what she's gone through in her life and what her family's gone through in her life. It's like, yeah, it's still a challenge, but I think she's uniquely prepared for that challenge. So I would encourage everybody to go read that story in The Athletic. Mitch, we appreciate your time as always. Definitely really appreciate your insight on Nebraska football, but love the stuff you do with kind of the human interest stories as well across Nebraska sports. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Mitch. That's Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Yeah, I would highly encourage go check that out. It's a super cool story.
Well, and the cool part about that too is, and you mentioned her, like, how tough it must be to not be playing right now, but to also remember that this Nebraska team is so incredibly young and so incredibly talented that she's going to have so many more runs of so what Nebraska is having this year in her playing career.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a unique position to be because she was literally a top 20 national recruit, and she's the only freshman not playing, as Mitch said, but it's because Merritt Beeson transferred in at her position. And so,
Merritt Beeson's pretty good.
Yeah, Merritt Beeson's might be the best player in the country. So you kind of have this really strange position for this super talented athlete to be in. And then she's got her whole family here. It's a great story. I would encourage people to go check it out on The Athletic. All right, coming up next at 8:45, we'll talk to Brian Edwards, get a little Vegas Insider action going on. We'll talk to Bruntz at 9. We've got a lot more here for you on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live from the H&H Chevrolet stage at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill.
What are you laughing at over there?
No, somebody just tweeted that Pierre Allen is one of the most egregious snubs in Heisman history, and I don't think that's accurate. It's because College Football Report put a picture of Pierre Allen when I think they meant to put a picture of Ndamukong Suh, and so that's why I was laughing. Anyway, really good stuff there for Mitch. We'll talk to Brian Edwards here in a minute, but wanted to get to the Jeff Sims thing a little bit because we kind of glossed over it. We didn't really get to it at the start of the show because we were talking Nebraska basketball, but we touched on it with Mitch a little bit there. I think Nebraska fans are going to have really complicated feelings about Jeff Sims, and
also,
I think there is this level of intense disappointment in what he turned out to be here, right? And so there is a part of it that I think there's a little bit of a good riddance, like you know what I mean, and not necessarily in a mean way, but in a hey, this didn't work out for anybody, just move on. Time for everybody to move on. I think there's also an element, and maybe I'm in the minority here. Maybe I'm there. Maybe this is just a small niche of people, but I do think there's a bunch of people, myself included, that kind of feel bad for him. There's a level of, like, he's obviously a physically talented guy. He's had some level of success at Georgia, kind of like Georgia Tech, like Mitch was talking about, especially his last year and a half at Georgia Tech. This isn't what it looked like.
Yeah, I mean, but
he was always a flawed guy.
I don't really want to factor in because he was injured, he didn't have the turnovers, because if he played a full season, who knows if those turnovers would have come.
Well, no, but even look at, because listen, he only played 5 games this year?
Yeah,
he had
4 interceptions.
And the turnovers were aggressive.
Yeah, I can't remember how many fumbles he had this past year.
He had at least 5.
Okay, so
I don't know if he lost all of them, but he had at least 5 because he had 3 in the first game, he had 1 in the second game, and he had 1 that got returned for the touchdown against either Maryland or Wisconsin.
Okay, well, let's just say, we'll call it safe, he lost 4. So let's say he had 4 picks and 4 fumbles.
So that's 8 turnovers in 5 games.
In a small amount of games, that isn't good.
And that it wasn't, even though he didn't play the whole season, I think he played about half the year at Georgia Tech his last year there, it wasn't anywhere near that. And so I think there was a reasonable expectation. It's like, hey, he might have some turnover issues, but it's not going to be to the fact where he's not playable.
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be what was freshman year Georgia Tech, Jeff Sims.
Or what we saw this year at Nebraska. And so I think there is a element, and I think especially by the end, it became so clear how badly it got in his head that it was, actually, I think he ended up with 6 interceptions because he had 4 in the first 2 games and they had 2 more later after Harvard got hurt. I think he ended up with 6 anyway, it doesn't matter. He had a boatload of turnovers in this year. But it really seemed like by the end, he had the full-on yips.
He had 6 interceptions. You're right.
Yeah. So it felt like he had like a full-on football mental breakdown by the end of it, to the point where you would have felt bad, not just because of him not being able to be functional at quarterback, but I felt bad as a human being asking him to go back out there again. At that point, that's why I wanted Chubba as much as anything. I was like, you just can't put Jeff back out there as a person. And so I don't know. I think he's going to have a complicated, not legacy, because there's no legacy there for Jeff Sims at Nebraska. There's not enough track record. But I think there's kind of some complicated feelings about, not that people want him to stay, but you just kind of everybody feels kind of bad about how this went.
You can have a heart for the guy. It's okay to recognize that Jeff Sims was kind of deteriorating as an athlete mentally. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders and wasn't able to get it off his shoulders. So you can say man, I really feel for the guy. I don't know if I feel bad necessarily, because those are the circumstances that you're presented as an athlete.
Sure, yeah.
And so you have to work through those, whether that's you work through them on your own, you work through them with counselors, like team counselors,
psychologist or whatever,
psychologists, or your coaching staff. But those are problems that he's going to have to work on. And it's not the responsibility of the fan, though, to have to feel bad for Jeff Sims for what they saw on the field, because the product and what they pay for is to watch a good football, or to watch a team win a game. You want to watch your team win. And Jeff Sims put this Nebraska team in so many positions to lose this year that I think it's going to be really hard to get people to say they feel bad for Jeff Sims versus hey, I recognize that something just wasn't right, but I also know that in sports, you have to be able to overcome those moments, and he just wasn't able to.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's from, kind of like an athlete perspective where you just watch somebody kind of mentally crumbling before your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's hard to watch.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, and I don't,
and I'm not going to say that I'm not, a vulnerable person either.
Yeah,
just like Jeff, but in different situations. But I can't. As athletes are what they're really essentially paid to perform.
Sure.
And if he's not performing, then he's got to go somewhere else. Like, that's just it. That's the nature of business.
No, and I agree.
You know what? Even if he's a little, soft in some ways, which I mean that and with the utmost respect when I say soft in some ways, those are things that he has to work on to harden himself up, harden his shell so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's like a mental toughness thing. I think sometimes certain things just get into your head to a point where you do need either a change of scenery or you need something sort of external to help fix it. I hate the New York Yankees, but I still remember watching Chuck Knobloch be unable to throw a baseball from second base to first base, and just almost, because I don't know, I kind of put myself in that guy's head, and there has to be a sense of like panic almost of just every time you have to do the thing that you're supposed to be able to do, knowing that you have no idea how it's going to go. Because that's generally where an athlete's confidence comes from, right? Is they have this ability to know, hey, I've prepared for this. I have the ability to execute this. When X, Y, and Z happens, I will be able to deliver. And when that gets eroded to the most basic, I mean, we're talking about dropping snaps. We're talking about not being able to hold on to a football in a simple run play. When that gets eroded to the most basic levels, listen, I don't want Jeff Sims back in Nebraska. I don't want, I don't want anybody to misconstrue what I'm saying here, but I do almost hope that he has some measure of success wherever he stops next, because it's really hard to watch somebody like just crumble in front of you.
Well, look,
like
man,
that.
That's why I question where
he ends
what
up.
level he ends up, because not just because I think it's going to take a change of scenery to maybe turn his play around, but I wonder if any team looks at what they saw this year and says, I can fix that, or I can help Jeff Sims get back to his old ways. I just don't know if that's out there. And so, people are probably like, Andrew, like, he'll find his way to a team, and, you're probably right. But until I see him find his way to a team, I'm going to sit here and question if he will end up on a new team.
Yeah, I think I agree with Mitch where it's going to be probably a group of 5 school that does not guarantee him a starting job. If he wants a guaranteed starting job, I think you're right. I think he has to probably drop to the FCS. But I think he will have opportunities to compete for a job at the group of 5 level, because there's so many teams. And listen, we've talked about this before. Coaches are egomaniacs by nature. They will think they can fix Jeff Sims. They'll watch the tape and say, oh, he did X, Y, and Z. They didn't put him in these positions to be successful. I can fix that, right? And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but there's certainly a coach that believes it. And so that's just kind of the nature of who coaches are.
Well, and that's why I brought up home. I think it was last week when we spoke a little bit about Jeff Sims, because of everything that we just talked about, the mood swings, it seemed like, or just, as you said, it seemed like everything just kind of blew up. Maybe it just takes Jeff Sims getting closer to home, getting closer to his people, for him to kind of get rejuvenated in that light.
Brian Edwards coming up next.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Now, Vegas insider, senior handicapper, and fan of the cold Budweiser bottles, Brian Edwards.
It's got to be touchdown, touchdown, touchdown.
Brian Edwards.
I don't really love it.
Brian Edwards.
Were they using the cream cheese to butter the bagel?
Brian Edwards.
I'm going with the cowgirl.
Here is Brian Edwards.
Welcome back as we wrap up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha and ESPN Tri-Cities. We are joined now by Brian Edwards on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Warhorse Sportsbook, the best place in Nebraska to place your sports bets, either in the casino in Lincoln or at Horseman's Park here in Omaha. Live bets are available, as well as straight bets, parlays, in-game props, in-game betting, all of it, nearly every major sporting event. Go to warhorsecasino.com/sportsbook or the Warhorse Casino app for a full list of details and house rules. Joining us now is Brian Edwards. B, how are you doing this morning? You look a little chilly.
I am. Did y'all see the last of my DMs just there?
We did.
I left.
Hey, at least you're not in Nebraska when the heat went out. All right, like that's a plus.
Yeah. What would that make the temperature here today?
-4.
I was like, you'd be real. No, actually, it's supposed to get to 60 today.
I'm
B.
just kidding. Yeah.
It's supposed to get to 60 degrees. It's a great day here in Nebraska.
I like how you are directing your dog by not saying a word because you are just being a good radio guy right now.
Listen, B, I've been there. I've been motioning furiously at my dogs while doing radio hits and be like, man, you gotta be quiet. It's all good, B.
How we doing this morning, guys? I'm not having the greatest morning.
Hey, your morning makes me have a great morning.
Okay, good. Whatever I can do.
I try not to enjoy your suffering as much as Andrew does, but we're doing okay this morning. Hey, B, I want to start off with one of the things you sent us that I found super interesting. And I know you've been on the Indiana Pacers overs a ton this year because they're making everybody money. But they've got the highest NBA total since 1995 coming up in their game with the Bucks at 255.5. Are you still playing the over?
Well, I'm not gonna say no, but I'm hoping that maybe we'll get some under action. Yeah, and I'm gonna watch it for. Well, I mean, we got a long day today, or is that that's the afternoon game, isn't it?
I think it might be the early game.
Yeah, so it might be
a ton of time.
Yeah, not gonna have a ton of time, but a little bit. Let's see. So what? I'm looking here. So 5 Eastern, I believe it tips off.
I think that's right.
Yeah, T-Mobile in Vegas. So, oh wow, I'm looking at the live line now. Looks like it's gone up even more. So my thought process is not going well.
So people still hammering the overs like they hammered Iowa unders.
Yeah, Circa's up to 257. So what I was going to say was I was maybe hoping it would come down to like 253 or so, and then maybe I would get involved. But right now, I think it's a little too high for me. Now, their games, Indiana's at least, they do average 253.7. And look, Milwaukee has had some games that have gotten to the 260s, 270s. It can happen for sure.
Their defense is atrocious.
Yeah. So it can definitely happen. But right now, I'm on the sidelines. Instead, I'm going to go with the Pelicans. And look, they're not all the way healthy, but at least all their starters are healthy right now. Mm-hmm. And even in this little 12-game stretch, McCollum wasn't available for, I want to say, the first, like 4 or 5. I think he's been back like 4 or 5 games, if I'm not mistaken. But they're mostly healthy now. And so in the last 12 games, the Pelicans are 8-4 straight up, 9-3 against the spread. Now, they're not a big underdog, plus 1.5 or 2 to the Lakers tonight, but they are underdogs, and their last 7 as an underdog, they're 7-0 against the spread with 6 outright wins for the season as a dog. And let's remember, I mean, Zion's missed time, McCollum's missed time, Marshall missed whatever the first 15 games or so, and yet as underdogs, they're still 9-3-1 against the spread with 8 outright wins. So I'm going to go with the Pelicans plus 1.5 or 2 in Vegas tonight.
Talking to Brian Edwards, who actually is just using a green screen on the YouTube side of things. He's in an igloo right now in Antarctica. B, let's talk about the college football playoff. You got some picks here. Bama plus 2. You like that play, but you would also be okay with plus 1 or 1.5. And you even said down to a pick 'em. So Bama, Michigan, still leaning Bama.
No lean whatsoever. I've already fired down. And I did right from the jump. I could not believe that they were underdogs. I still can't believe they're underdogs. I don't think they're going to remain underdogs. I think they will be -3 by kickoff. I think they're better than Michigan in every way. Pretty much every position. I'm just not that impressed with Michigan. I know they've been dominant against a lot of bad teams. I really only think they've played 2 good teams, Penn State and Ohio State, and they got both of them at home. Both were close games, but I mean, they handled their business, good for them, and a lot of it without their head coach, credit to them. And I'm not saying it's going to be like Georgia dealt with them a couple of years ago, with, a blowout. You knew the game was over late first quarter, but I do think Alabama wins this game comfortably. And Alabama all the way for me. And I have a 6-1 ticket for them to win it all. And if I didn't, I'd be betting them plus 190 or plus 200 to win it all. I think they're going to win this.
B, on the other semifinal, you are heavy on Washington, not just on the number, but on that money line as well. What are you seeing there?
Yeah. Now I'm not as heavy. I mean, obviously I have 2 plays because I'm plus the points and the money line, but I don't like it as much as I like Alabama.
Okay.
But just to clarify that for money management purposes, but I am very high on Washington as well. So they've been an underdog four times since Kalen DeBoer got there, and they've won outright all 4 times. And even going back to his last year at Fresno, he won outright at UCLA as an 11-point dog, covered at Oregon in a 7-point loss as a 20.5-point dog. So DeBoer last 6 underdog spots, 6-0 against the spread with 5 outright wins. But I think these teams are very evenly matched. But and therefore when it's evenly matched, I can get 4 or 4.5. And I think I like Penix a little bit better than Ewers. They're both really good.
Mm-hmm.
Both probably be first round. Well, I don't know. I'm not positive on that, but I would think there would be first round consideration. And Washington's defense has played a lot better. And if Texas has a weakness, it's the secondary, in my opinion, on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
And Washington's got elite wide receivers. I think it'll be a great game, and I think Washington will win a nail biter. Give me the Huskies.
So, B, you mentioned that you had already pulled the trigger on the Bama bet. When you are betting this far out on some of these matchups, do you ever kind of, I don't know if hedge is the right word, but do you ever make additional plays on those games as you get closer, as the lines change? Like, how do you manage that as things kind of move?
Yeah, so like in the regular season, I think you know what number you're looking for on Sundays, and you try to get it before it moves against you. And in the bowl games, it's similar that first day, like this past Sunday and that Monday morning when you're getting some information. But a lot of the information we want, we're not going to have, sometimes not till an hour before kickoff. So unlike the regular season, I approach the bowl games kind of with some patience and with information being pivotal. And a lot of that information, we're not going to, so a lot of these teams break for a while and, reconvene and whenever, sometimes if we're talking about January 1st game, they may take a break on the 22nd, reconvene the 26th, and that's when you start getting some information, those practices. Now, it's different for these ones we've got coming up in 9 or 10 days. But, with opt-outs, the portal, et cetera, it's why bet now when you don't know who's going to be on the field?
Especially when you get to those later games, and say the quarterback's missing, or they're leading their star wide receiver or their top running back. Like, those are the skill players that you're kind of referring to.
Like Johnny Wilson from Florida State has already said he's not playing in the Orange Bowl, right? But you got a lot of those that come up later that could really affect how you feel about these lines.
Yeah, and even some of these just not that big of bowl games, like the McLeod kid for James Madison, the quarterback, he's going in the portal, but I read that he's going to play. Now, with the Rourke kid, Curtis Rourke, who's been at Ohio, I think he broke his brother's records at Ohio. He's going in the portal, but I have scoured Twitter. I have no idea if he's going to play or not. Some of these guys that are going in the portal can still play that one last game. And their current coaches are good with that, and then they bolt. So, and I mean, there's like 7 or 8 QBs in the portal where we don't know if they're playing or not. Rourke being one, just off the top of my head.
Well, B, talk about that Mizzou Ohio State game. And which way you're leaning there. Got about a minute.
Yeah, so I have played Missouri. This is the only 2 that I've played besides Washington and Bama are Missouri and Jacksonville State -3. So with Missouri, I heard Drinkwitz talk early this week. This is their biggest bowl game since the Pinkel era. They're not going to have any opt-outs. I mean, Luther Burden's a true sophomore. We don't have to worry about that. Whereas Ohio State could have as many as a half dozen guys opt out because they're going to be drafted in the first 2 or 3 rounds. McCord already left. And Brown, the backup, we're not sure if he's even healthy enough. They've got an Oregon State transfer, so we'll see. But I'm going with Missouri already and Jacksonville State.
Brian Edwards, Vegas Insider. B, we appreciate it as always, and stay warm out there, man. I know it's tough.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Grab a blanket.
See ya.
That's Brian Edwards, our Vegas Insider. He's trying to stay warm down there in Florida. It's a weird thing to say, I know. But it's gonna be 60 here today in Nebraska. He's in the wrong place to have your heat go out.
Trying to stay warm in Florida.
Listen,
That should be on a T-shirt.
It's cold out there in the Panhandle. We've got Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7 coming up next.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me, Shane Schillerberg producing. We're on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, as well as KFOR in Lincoln for this third hour. One of every 3 fatal crashes in Nebraska involves an impaired driver. Why take chances? If you drink or use other substances, do not drive. Impaired driving is deceptively dangerous. That's a message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. What is not dangerous is talking to our friend Michael Bruntz.
I don't know.
Here.
Sometimes it could be.
I mean, you never know. But our friend Michael Bruntz here on Husker 24 from Husker 24/7. Bruntz, how are you this morning? Michael.
Here he is. Now he's potted up.
My bad about that.
Michael, you there?
Yeah.
There we go.
He's
How,
like,
does anyone call you Mike?
How about Mikey?
I get Mikey a little bit. A few people call me Mike. Like my college roommates called me Mike. That's kind of the segment that calls me Mike.
Yeah.
Not very many people.
Okay,
Big Mike, not just Mike.
Everybody
Big
I
Mike.
hear, it's mostly Bruntz, some Bruntsy, some Michael. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone call you Mike. I just realized that.
It's very, very rare. Very rare. My mom, if she heard you call me that, would probably murder you. So don't do that.
What's your middle name?
Call you Mike? She doesn't like the Mike?
She doesn't like the Mike.
Oh,
You know,
interesting.
That was always you quickly got corrected when I was growing up, but somebody called me Mike.
Man, you're running a real fine line naming your kid Michael if you don't like the name Mike. Like she's living dangerously.
Well, every third kid born from like 1980 to like 1986 was named Michael. So
That's fair. I think that's fair.
Not a rare name.
No, I think that's fair. It's, you remind me of Michael Jordan in that sense. You don't hear a lot of Mike Jordans out there, It's always Michael.
Yeah, that's I appreciate that. That I remember.
And you know what?
Jordan.
You hear a lot of Jordans out there, and we
Yeah.
hear a lot of Bruntsies.
That's what I'm saying.
So you know what? You're essentially Michael Jordan.
Michael Bruntz and Michael Jordan, same guy.
Do you guys remember? I was thinking about this the other day. Are you guys old enough to remember when Gatorade came in glass bottles?
I mean,
Michael Jordan.
I'm not, but I know about Gatorade coming in glass bottles.
I do actually remember. It was very early in my Gatorade drinking days, but I do remember the glass bottle Gatorade, and frankly, I prefer it.
It's kind of dangerous, though, right? Like, you're
Oh,
out on
yeah.
the playground, you got your Gatorade out there. Like, all it takes is like somebody to take a wrong step or something when you're going for a loose ball, and all of a sudden you got a situation on your hands there.
Yeah, I wonder. I have this really ridiculous image. You know those like cheesy 80s bar fight movies where they break the beer bottle off and like start a fight?
Mhm.
I just wonder, did that ever happen on a playground where there was like a
Oh,
flagrant
boy.
foul? Somebody gets real mad. They're like busting up the Gatorade bottle, like, let's do this.
Throwing days, you got like Roadhouse going on.
Yeah,
Rucker Park there. Yeah.
I mean, those rough and tumble streets of Millard North in Millard, Nebraska there, you never know what's going on. That's probably why they had to switch to the plastic.
Yeah, just breaking off a bottle on the fence there.
I will say the glass bottles made it feel more like it gave the Gatorade more gravitas. Like, this is actually going to help me. It came in a glass bottle. This is medicinal.
Yeah, yep. The only reason because the Michael Jordan thing, and then I got served the algorithm hit me with a Michael Jordan Gatorade commercial from like the 90s, and I was like, okay, I kind of blocked out that they used to have those things in glass bottles, which seems like a terrible idea. I digress.
I dramatically prefer the 90s Jordan Gatorade commercials to the weird like Jordan 2010s Hanes commercials where he's rocking a very questionable mustache.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Well, the 2010s were hard for him. I mean, if you Google,
not financially.
If you Google Michael Jordan pants, he wore some large pants in the last decade.
It did take him a while to adjust to the lack of baggy pants. It seems like he stuck with that longer than most.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's going to call him on it, but he was out there like in the big pants playing golf. So those of your listeners sitting at the desk looking for something to do, Michael Jordan pants, Google it now.
Yep, it's like the old parachute that you would use in PE class.
Yeah,
he was out there golfing in Jinkos, basically. It's too bad because he was a fashion icon during his playing days. So,
by the way, if you want a lot of Gatorade glass bottles, you can get them for about $130 off of eBay for a set of 3.
I actually don't want that at all.
I mean, that's a little pricey, but
or you could get a 12-pack from the store for like $8.
Bruntz, I don't know how we got here. I blame you mostly, but
yep, well, we're here.
we are here. Let's talk about another thing where we may not know how people get here, and that's the transfer portal.
But hey, there may be some NIL dollars mixed in, and maybe it's a Gatorade deal.
Let's get a Gatorade deal in here to sign a quarterback. No, if you're looking at, if I could give you the odds of kind of the handful of guys that have been talked about for Nebraska at quarterbacks, let's say the Will Howard, Kyle McCord, Sam Levitt, who am I missing? Blake Shapen and Cam Ward, or the field. So basically any other quarterback in the transfer portal. Where would you put your money?
I would put it on, and I think I could probably even narrow down
my list.
I would probably even narrow down your little crew a little bit there too. I mean, I would probably say
let's start crossing guys off.
A McCord, Shapen, Levitt group.
Okay.
Somebody out of there.
McCord, Shapen, Levin. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's intrigue on certainly intrigue on Nebraska's part. I think, from, who we've been able to talk to, whether it's the quarterbacks or those around them, I think there's legitimate interest in Nebraska. And I mean, there's a lot of schools out there looking for quarterbacks, right? And I think that Nebraska, despite its offensive flaws and what it did and did not do last year, I think it's an attractive place because the NIL picture is going to be pretty good. You have a quarterback picture that you're going to have to compete and win the job, but at the same time, it's not like you're going in there against somebody that's, an incumbent starter. I mean, it's kind of a good situation for guys that are, kind of down to the last year or looking to start right away. So I think Nebraska, is a little bit more of an attractive option than maybe what people probably would have expected going into the start of portal season. So yeah, I think Nebraska's kind of found guys that they feel fit them, not only offensively but also, from just off the field type stuff and things like that. So I would probably go off of that group rather than the field right now.
Bruntz,
where we're staying today.
Bruntz, I spoke about this a little bit yesterday, and BC and I kind of went back and forth on it too. Trying to get the flashy name in the portal, because I think it's important at some point to admit that you have to get somebody in at Nebraska that gets you excited to watch football next year. And out of the three names that you narrowed down Ravi's list to, Kyle McCord is really the only name that does that to me over Sam Levitt. Who was that? Over Blake Shapen.
Yeah.
Like, both are good quarterbacks, but those aren't names that get me like fired up to watch Nebraska next season. How important do you think it is to find that flashy name to go along with the fit?
Well, I think it helps you from the standpoint of, Nebraska's not going to be super active in this portal cycle, I don't think. But I think if you are able to do that, it helps you bring in others that can help you right away. So I think there's a benefit there. I don't know. I mean, I think to me the fit is so much more important. And I understand what you're saying though about the splash and you need to get people interested. I think you also have to kind of be careful because I think there's also skepticism out there on the part of Nebraska fans about, okay, well we've seen the flash, we've heard these things about this X player and it hasn't worked out. So I think there's a little bit of that too, but I don't know. I mean, I think for Nebraska, you just have to find somebody that can take you to that next step. And I don't know, certainly of that group that we mentioned, who's probably the flashiest for you? Is it Ward? That's the guy that does it for you?
Well, yeah, Cam Ward's a flashy name, but there's other names like DJU is a name that is a something that like nationally is recognized. Like that's kind of how I look at it. Because even like when you said Nebraska kind of should be skeptical, and they should, because last year they said, hey, we know what we can get out of a guy like Jeff Sims. We evaluated him and he's going to be our guy. And then he just wasn't. So you have to wonder about how this staff approaches the portal in terms of, do they know what they're evaluating? But I still don't think Jeff Sims was a name anybody said last year that was like, yes, that's a flashy name. He may have like, star power in terms of, whatever he's graded, but it's not like, oh my gosh, that's the guy that I want out of the portal when, say, last year, Devin Leary would have been more of a flashy name than Jeff Sims.
Yeah. I mean, I get your point. I mean, I think it's got to be fit. And even when you kind of start looking at that list of guys that, that Nebraska's been connected to so far, I mean, Ward would be the flashiest name. Would he be the best fit for what Nebraska wants to do offensively? I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of the balancing act. So I get it though. I mean, I think Nebraska is probably going to be able to get more of a name than maybe what I probably would have expected going into the portal cycle, and probably a lot of people too. So, I mean, there's that, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on this season coming up, and I think it's a little bit more important to make sure that you find the guy that's going to get you to a bowl game and beyond versus the splash. Although if you can find somebody that can do both for you, more power to you.
Bruntz, you mentioned you think they're probably not going to be quite as active in the portal in general this year, but another spot that I guess they're going to look for some depth and maybe some experience is that wide receiver spot, and that the quarterback transfer probably does directly impact their ability to land wide receiver talent, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's what I was mentioning when I kind of said, like, okay, well, that's one spot where you get a name at quarterback or somebody that's significant. I think that makes it a little bit easier for you because, I mean, guys want to know who's going to be throwing them the ball. And
Ja'Cory Barnes certainly wants to know.
Yeah, he's excited to learn that too. But yeah, I mean, I think that helps you. I mean, I think there's some specific spots that Nebraska is going to have to kick the tires on. I think running back's probably another they'll look at, just given their situation there. But yeah, I mean, it's just the way college football is now. It's such a quarterback-driven game, and when you are able to kind of get free agents the way you are now, there's a lot of attention in there, and you get the right guy can help you make things a little bit easier in other areas too.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz of Husker 24/7. Speaking of transfers at some other positions, how likely do you think, if at all, is it that Princewell and his brother Princely end up teaming up at Nebraska, or is that just kind of a Nebraska pipe dream that we're having here?
I don't know. I mean, I would say pipe dream, but at the same time, I mean, there's a connection there beyond just the fact that they're brothers. Princely had been connected with Matt Rule at Baylor. I think there was a pretty strong connection there during the recruiting process. So, I mean, at least there's that. So it's not like you're just pulling on that thread. But I don't know. I mean, he's kind of at an interesting point too, because he's seen as like a day 2 probably pick in the NFL draft right now.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like that's going to be a pretty that would be an expensive recruitment out of the portal probably. So I don't know. I mean, it would be a great addition for Nebraska. There's no denying that, but at least the fact that there's familiarity there with the family and Matt Rule beyond just the brother being here, that at least is one that I think you have to watch a little bit.
Bruntzy, give me a number, because you don't think it's going to be high. How many portal transfers do you think Nebraska ultimately ends up with?
I would say the number I'm kind of working off of is like maybe 6 tops, 6, 7. I mean, I just don't think right now you have a lot of flexibility to add guys. I mean, we always say, the math is going to work out. They'll figure out how to get to the 85 number when they have to and all that stuff. But, I mean, you guys have seen how few guys have gone into the portal so far. I think Nebraska's done a pretty good job of figuring out how to kind of manage a locker room in the NIL era. I think there's, I think kind of a groundwork or a foundation in the program right now that guys are pretty happy. So, I just don't know that they can make that work numbers-wise, bringing in a ton of guys out of the portal, unless there's significant attrition that has not made itself known yet. And I'm sure that you'll have that after spring ball once guys kind of figure out where they are on the depth chart. But I just don't think it's nearly as active. And based on what Matt Rule and his staff have said, they're going to value development. They're going to value young guys and bringing them up in the program versus going and getting immediate help at certain spots. So they have to address issues at wide receivers one, I think, running backs another. Depending on how things shake out at linebacker, that's probably another position that I would at least consider that they would have to maybe bring somebody in. So the list of needs isn't as long as it was. And I think also just kind of given the way that they flipped the roster so far since they've gotten here, it's not going to be as nearly active as it has been.
Yeah, Bruntz, we've looked at the ability and I guess the desire for Nebraska players to remain at Nebraska with Coach Rule as a positive. And I think largely and long-term it will be, but I mean, there's a bit of a chance that it could hurt their ability to improve next year, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the evaluation process is you have to weigh that. Like, what's a young guy going to be in the program 2 years from now versus, what you might be able to get out of somebody that's in the portal now. And that's the balancing act. I mean, I think some programs would say, we have to be better now. I think Nebraska feels like they've got guys where they can be better now, but there's going to be attrition. I mean, there's still guys that, I think you could probably look at the roster and say that there's probably a slim chance that this guy or that guy is on the roster, come next fall. But I think they're going to be a little bit choosier. I mean, I think that's just kind of how they see the program, and they're not afraid to bring in guys. I mean, I think, there was some kind of undercurrent out there among fans, like, oh, I wonder what they're actually going to do quarterback wise. How aggressive are they going to be? And, I think Nebraska's shown that they're willing to go out and really have, improve at a spot where they feel like they need to. So I don't think they're going to be shy about going and getting guys that they need to, but I think generally they're always going to, go back to the guys that they have on their roster. And the thing is too, Matt Rule has the ability still to kind of play with roster numbers, given as, he's a new head coach through the spring, but that number that he can kind of do that with is also dwindling as well as guys that were here before he got here have left the program.
Bruntsy, stepping away from the Huskers for a moment, there was an NCAA proposal that came out yesterday, a couple of days ago. Charlie Baker proposed a way to create new subdivision, but also give enhanced educational benefits. Have you looked into that at all?
A little bit, not too much. I've kind of been portal focused and recruiting stuff like that the last couple of days, but I've read a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So I won't ask you anything like too deep in it, but maybe you can help solve something I'm confused about. Maybe you and Ravi can help solve something I'm confused about, because under the proposal, okay, it said schools in both Division I subdivisions, which continue to compete against one another for NCAA championships, except for in FBS football, which is run by the college football playoff, right? So if teams were to break off and go into a subdivision, they pay the money, whatever it is, to go to a different one. We'll call it Tier 1, for example. Does Tier 1 create their own NCAA championship game? Is that how that works?
It feels like that's where it's headed, right?
Okay. So
I think it's like a super league. I think it'd be like the
but it's a super league championship, and then there's a college football playoff still for the other teams that didn't qualify.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's the bridge that I've been trying to marry there, because all night I was losing sleep over, man, if somebody elevates, are they going to play in a championship game someday? Can they lift a trophy above their head? Oh my goodness. No, this proposal is kind of crazy though, because it's a pay for play type of thing, but it all factors in to the NIL stuff, which is what we've been talking about through the transfer portal this whole time.
Well, it would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, it would come directly from the schools, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The school pays the people directly.
I think that's kind of where it's been headed. I mean, I think if you look at what Nebraska's done with some of their in-house moves, and you kind of read what Trev Alberts has said, I think that's kind of, for a while, kind of the direction that Nebraska's kind of anticipated things going. And again, like I said, I kind of just took a cursory glance at this stuff. It still somehow would require congressional involvement, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Well,
it's going to be a long time.
I never understand.
I was gonna say, I hope you're not still losing sleep over this. It's going to be a while.
No, you guys helped me solve it. I had to talk it out with somebody, but see, not enough people read as much as I read 10 different sources of information yesterday, Bruntz, before I made my video. 10, and nobody's article matched up. Nobody's, and I'm just like, here we are.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It just seems like everything is inching towards football being separate from everything else, and especially that level of, basically schools are going to have to decide, are we in this or are we not? And it seems like, at least from Nebraska's perspective, that they've been expecting that for a while. Like there's going to be some break off, some change in oversight, and who's paying, and whether they're employees or not. I mean, all that has to be determined. But I think, with at least here locally, I mean, I think that's been the assumption that that's the direction things are headed. Sooner rather than later. So, I mean, that to me, just the headlines and what little reading I did, it just kind of seemed like, okay, this is a little bit of an embrace of whatever that next step might be. But I don't know that anybody really has a great handle on that yet either, which is kind of scary.
Bruntz, 30 seconds here. Let's start the interview or end the interview the way we started it. Is there another celebrity endorsement commercial you'd like to reminisce about real quick?
Is Brett Favre still doing the copper thing? Is that done?
That's done.
I think I've seen Jerry Rice on him now.
Oh, really?
I think so. Yeah.
I don't
or maybe Romo. Maybe Romo.
Oh, wow.
The copper fit ones.
I don't stay up as late as I used to, so I don't know where that
copper fit athlete. Let's figure this out.
We'll figure it out. I don't think he's doing Levi's anymore either. I think they may not have loved his defrauding the Wrangler. How dare I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. My bad. Bruntz, good time as always. We'll talk to you again next week.
See you guys.
See ya.
Hurrdat Hot Seat coming up next.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are brought to you by Pratt Dental in North Platte, Nebraska. Pratt Dental was the first certified dentist in Nebraska to have the BioClear method and modern smile design, which can correct many aesthetic dilemmas in a permanent and less invasive manner than traditional treatments. Permanent and less invasive allows you less time needed for the treatment, less time waiting, obviously less invasive, fewer appointments, and you can get multiple restorations done in the same day. The place you can go to find out more is prattdental.com/bioclear-dental-treatment. Or if that's too much to remember, just go to prattdental.com, look under their services tab, and the BioClear treatment will be right there for you. That is Pratt Dental. It's time for the Hurrdat Hot Seat.
Yes, sir.
One of my favorite portions of each and every week. I'll allow you to go first.
So
Mr.
I saw this prompt on Twitter, so I'm not going to say I came up with it, but I think it's an interesting question.
Let's do it.
I think Shane can even pop in for this one as well. To win $3 billion, which I don't think it.
That's a lot of money.
Come on,
I think
Shane.
it takes a lot to want to compete for $3 billion. You have to survive 24 hours getting chased by a horror villain of your choice. Who are you picking?
Okay. So there's a couple, I think, decent options here.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't watch a lot of horror movies, so I'm going off of my general knowledge here. If you don't fall asleep, Freddy Krueger can't get you, right? I believe he only attacks in dreams.
Yes.
So if you can stay awake for 24 straight hours, good to go. You have $3 billion.
Which you should be able to do.
I like get some coffee, get some energy drinks.
That's right, Shane?
Freddy Krueger only attacks in dreams. That's the whole thing.
You got to stay awake. So
you stay awake for 24 hours. That is not that hard to do.
Well, no, I think you got to stay awake forever.
No.
Eventually,
No.
Eventually, you're going to sleep.
No, because you only have to survive 24 hours.
Shane, why don't you listen to the prompts?
Is this with a B or with an M, by the way?
B, billion.
Billion.
Yeah. So they're only chasing you for 24 hours. So after the 24 hours, you are free and clear of the villain.
Okay. So can I give mine?
Sure.
I'm gonna go with Chucky.
That's probably what I would have said.
That was the other option, because you can just drop kick that dude and you're fine.
Well, I'm going with it. He's got short legs. I know I got short legs and I can't run that fast, but his legs are a lot shorter. So I gotta guess I can run a lot faster than him. So I'm just gonna run.
You're gonna run for 24 consecutive hours.
Okay.
Hey,
that's why I said okay.
For that amount of money, absolutely.
I don't know, Shane. With all that vaping you do, I don't know if your lungs are in that kind of condition.
Shane, but let me tell you, you could walk and vape faster than Chucky could.
That's what I mean. He's a doll. He's like 2 feet tall, maybe like a foot tall. Like, just punt Chucky. I don't understand how Chucky is scary. Now, if John Gruden's chasing me, it kind of has the Chucky face a little bit.
One for me, and I was trying to get as creative as I could.
Sure, yeah.
Am I okay just to stand on land and say, Jaws, come get me?
Is Jaws a horror movie or a thriller? And also, is Jaws a villain, or is he just living his best life and these people keep coming up in his house?
I think he's just argue all these villains are living their best life.
I think
Jaws is just an animal. He's in the ocean. Leave him alone.
Jaws is just misunderstood.
Exactly.
Oh, is Jaws misunderstood?
Okay. I think to have a villain, you have to have like villainous intent. Does Jaws have villainous intent, or is he just a shark doing shark stuff? Is a shark doing shark stuff a villain? That's what I want to know.
I'm trying to remember scenes in the movie.
Yeah, it's been, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's been like 30 years since I've seen Jaws. So
probably just doing shark stuff.
That's what I mean.
Probably.
So I don't know if he counts as a villain. It's a good thought.
Yeah,
I like where your head's at.
I'm going somewhere.
I like where your head's at, but I don't think Jaws is a villain. I think we're up in his house. And he's like, guys, what are we doing here? I'm a shark. I'm gonna do shark stuff.
Okay, so Chucky is a for sure.
Chucky's an easy one,
yes,
because he's a doll, very small. I'm not concerned about Chucky. Like he might cut my ankle a little bit. I'm not terribly concerned.
Right.
I do think I could stay awake for 24 straight hours. So I think Freddy Krueger is doable.
So if somebody says I can outrun Gru for sure. Despicable Me, Shane, anybody?
I'm not going to call that a horror movie, so I'm going to say no on that one.
He is a villain.
He is a villain. I'm trying to think of other villains.
This one says Michael Myers, just take a brisk walk in a large open area for 24 hours.
See, I don't want to walk for 24 hours.
Yeah, don't go up any stairs. You'll be fine.
I don't
Stay
know.
out of the closet. You'll be good.
I don't know about that. I feel like Michael Myers is not a good one there. I think you're asking too much of yourself to just walk for 24 straight. I think people are underestimating how hard it would be to walk for 24 straight hours. And we need to get our minds right here. Come on. What are we doing? Let's see.
Well, Freddy Krueger, like you said, is the easy one.
Yeah, just stay awake for 24 hours. Just load up on energy drinks, stay awake for 24 hours.
But if it wasn't Freddy Krueger, then
Chucky.
it would be Chucky.
Definitely Chucky.
If it wasn't Chucky, who would it be? This is where we'll end. Right here.
That's where it gets a little dicey, right? Because then you're starting to get into like more difficult decisions.
All right, let's type this in. Easy horror villains to escape.
I just need to think of horror villains because I don't watch horror movies. Horror villains.
Weakest horror movie monsters we could easily escape from. Okay. The Leprechaun.
I got one for you.
This was a
what's that?
1993 film.
Jack Nicholson from The Shining. He's a horror monster in that, but he's limping. I mean, you could easily outrun him.
I don't know. I don't know that I like my chances.
He's a little possessed.
I mean, is Hannibal Lecter in jail? Because I think I could survive Hannibal Lecter in prison for 24 hours. Can it get me if I don't go into the sewers?
Yes, it can.
Okay, so not on it. I don't know that. That's why I have to ask these questions. I'm not sure.
Can it?
That's what I
don't. It did in the original television version. Yes.
Okay. I mean, if we're counting like monsters, like with Godzilla, just don't go to Japan. You should be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty easy one for me. Just don't be in Japan. I'm trying to think what else. I don't know a ton of.
Jack Frost from 1997.
I'm not familiar enough with that one to have any.
See, I don't have a good range on horror movies. All right, we can rest here. Freddy Krueger and Chucky would be the two choices.
I think so. I mean, I'm trying to look at other lists here. There's a list that's got the mummy from The Mummy. Just don't go to Egypt. It's fine.
This one has the grandparents from The Visit. Do you remember that movie?
No.
Where the kids go and think they're with their grandparents, but in hindsight, it's like people from a mental institution that killed their grandparents and are pretending to be their grandparents.
I think I could beat up old people. Yeah, I think I'd be fine there.
Yeah. But is that a horror film?
I mean, it sounds like a horror film.
That was more of a thriller.
Fair. All right, let's change gears here. I'll do mine. This is a totally different question. If you could have any transfer portal QB, I want you to tell me who it would be, but also how many wins does that mean for Nebraska?
Interesting.
Because this is, I think we're equating, hey, if we get the right QB, it gets us the W's. And I think that might be true. I think there is a sell there to these quarterbacks. It's like, hey, we won 5 games with basically no competent quarterback play whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
You know how easy it would be get to 8, maybe 10,
right?
With just even a above average quarterback. I think that's the pitch, right?
Correct.
So, which quarterback and how many wins?
And this is immediate, so I can choose.
You can choose anybody currently in the portal.
Yeah.
So you can choose Dylan Gabriel if they're not committed already.
Yep.
So you couldn't choose like Max Johnson because he's going to North Carolina. But you could choose Dylan Gabriel.
You could choose Riley Leonard.
You could choose Riley Leonard because he's not technically committed to Notre Dame yet. But I think there's a couple options here, right? You could go like your instant impact guy, or like maybe I want the 5-star Dante Moore. Maybe,
well, that's what I'm looking at right now.
Now
as future building.
Maybe you sacrifice a win or two this year for 3, 4, 5 more wins in years 2 and 3. Let's hold off on this. I'll let you think about it over the break. But which transfer portal quarterback and how many wins does it mean for Nebraska next year?
I got it.
That is the Hurrdat Hot Seat question that we will return with coming up next. If you have a thought, you can give us a call at 888-638-4876 on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline, or hop in those YouTube comments. They're always up and popping. More Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back. We will be back. will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Wrapping up the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla, Andrew Rogers with me, Shane Schillerberg producing. We're on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. Carrying over our question from the end of the last segment, I asked Andrew, what transfer portal quarterback, anyone you want, any transfer portal quarterback you want, and how many wins does that mean for Nebraska next year? Now, you got a couple options here. You can go for immediacy, a one-year guy with no guarantees after that, but probably a more experienced, proven commodity, or maybe you go young, maybe a Dante Moore of the world, where you like his pedigree, you like his talent, and you're hoping for not just one good year, but a few good years. Where did you land?
I land on Dante Moore.
Okay.
And the only reason I land on Dante Moore is this team is not in enough of a position to have Dylan Gabriel slot in and his weapons be as premier as they need to be in order to compete for the college football playoff next year.
Fair.
I would love to have chosen Dylan Gabriel or Cam Ward. That was my top three. It was Dylan Gabriel, it was Dante Moore, and it was Cam Ward. I would have loved to have chosen one of those slot in guys right now. But if I can have the opportunity to dip my hand into the Dante Moore basket, I feel like that's too hard to pass up on with all the eligibility left.
He would be, I believe, the only five-star quarterback in Nebraska history. I get that there have been some super talented guys at Nebraska, and the recruiting rankings only go back so far, right? So that's a bit of a skewed number, but he'd be probably the most talented transfer. I mean, he'd be the most talented quarterback in the last, since Eric Crouch, basically, at Nebraska. So that's a really tempting guy to have. So with Dante Moore, he'd be a redshirt freshman next year. How many wins does that mean for Nebraska next year?
Next year, that means you get to a bowl game. He wins you 8 games.
Ooh, okay. I was thinking 7.
So I gave the edge to 8 because he's going to get the revenge game against UCLA.
Fair.
I like the first 7 games.
Yep.
As much as I want to say Nebraska can go 7-0, I would expect it to probably look closer to
6-1, 5-2.
Yeah, I was going to say 5-2,
Yeah.
6-1. If I'm getting to 8 wins, it has to look like 6-1.
Yeah.
Because then you get the win over UCLA, and then you have your chance at Wisconsin or Iowa down the stretch.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's kind of how I landed at 7 as well, is maybe 5-2, and then 2 of those 3 that you mentioned there. This is tough for me
because there's so many good names in the portal.
Yes, because there's guys out there that I think guarantee you not only a bowl game next year,
but wins.
I think I could feel good about guaranteeing up to 9 wins next year with certain guys. But here's the huge but of the situation. Depending on how you feel about Daniel Kalen, depending on how you feel about the rest of the room, there's really, because if you bring in one of those guys, maybe Chubba stays, maybe he doesn't. Maybe Chubba improves, maybe he doesn't. We really don't know. But you're basically doing a 1-year rental because you have no guarantee they're going to get a younger transfer guy also. There's no guarantee in this scenario that you get Dylan Gabriel and Sam Levitt, right? So I actually landed on Dante Moore as well, because I do think like a Dylan Gabriel or a Will Howard or a Cam Ward gets you 9, somewhere between 8 and 10 wins next year. I don't think the schedule is overwhelming next year. I think USC takes a step back.
Dylan Gabriel's the best of the bunch in terms of statistical numbers and production.
And he's got an ability to kind of extend plays. I think he could help Nebraska out a little bit there, doing some off-schedule stuff. But I look at it and I go, okay, but then what? You're in the exact same position next year where you don't feel necessarily great about your quarterback room. Even if you do have a Danny Kalen, he hasn't played any college football at that point. And maybe Chubba has transferred by that point. What do you have in the room there? Are you going back to Heinrich Harburg? No, you're going back to the transfer portal, and you're in the exact same spot again. With a Dante Moore, maybe you win 7 or 8 instead of 9 or 10, but in 2024, 2025, 2026, maybe even, you feel way better about your quarterback room.
Right. And it's unfortunate that his name is linked to the state school that wears the M on the helmet.
Yeah.
They may have been stealing signs this year.
Allegedly.
Yep.
Although they did accept a punishment really quickly, so nobody would keep asking questions.
What was the line in Law-Abiding Citizen? It's not about like what you know, it's about what you can prove in court.
Yep. That's from it might be in Law-Abiding Citizen also, but it's also in The Departed.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not about what you know, it's what you can prove. Yeah.
And so that is how Michigan took it on the chin.
Okay, so we both landed on Dante Moore. We're both in that 7-8 win range for that one. All right, your turn on the next question.
Where to go with this one? Okay, let's go here. If you could bring back to life a famous athlete in history to spend the day with, who would it be and why?
That's a really interesting one. I'll just go with my first gut instinct, which was Jackie Robinson.
It's a good one.
I've always been fascinated with Jackie Robinson. Obviously, he went through as much as anyone in sports history, right? In integrating baseball, but he also just had a really interesting life outside of that. Most people say that baseball was like his 3rd or 4th best sport after football and track, and maybe even basketball, depending on who you ask. This guy was a phenomenal athlete at UCLA. His brother was the silver medalist to Jesse Owens in the 100-meter dash in the 36 Berlin Olympics. And no one remembers him at all because A, he finished second to Jesse Owens, and B, he was Jackie Robinson's brother. Just a really interesting life for Jackie Robinson. And then he became an advocate for, the civil rights movement, and I think was involved in baseball in an official capacity with Major League Baseball. I believe he worked for Major League Baseball for a while as well. Just a super interesting life, and I've always been fascinated and curious about him. So that was my gut reaction as soon as you ask the question.
So my same thing, gut reaction was Babe Ruth.
Okay, sure.
And the reason for that is,
you want to know if he actually called a shot? That's my first question.
I want to know if he pointed to the bleachers.
Yeah, I'd be like, were you pointing at the pitcher or you pointing at the bleachers? Pitcher or bleachers? Which one is it?
were you pointing at the clock and saying that it's almost time to call the game because there
home.
weren't lights or what's happening here? No, so I'd like to spend some time with him just because, he's the greatest. He's labeled as the greatest of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I use the term labeled because I don't necessarily think Babe Ruth is the greatest baseball player of all time, at least not anymore, because of how the game has evolved and the stats and various numbers that like Barry Bonds was able to put up in terms of home runs. And yes, that the conversation of steroids comes into play, but who knows? Maybe George Herman Ruth was doing something under the table.
You have to understand that, first of all, the overall talent pool in baseball wasn't as good then. And secondly, the advantage of steroids to Barry Bonds is, I think, lesser than or at least equal to the advantage of Babe Ruth not playing in an integrated Major League Baseball. He never played. He only played with white players. He didn't play with, you've got literally now you have a globe's worth of baseball talent coming into Major League Baseball.
Sure.
You didn't even have a full country's worth of talent coming into baseball.
But Babe Ruth is still labeled as the greatest baseball player ever because of the things that he was able to do. And he did phenomenal things.
To me, he's more of a pioneer than the best ever.
So that's kind of why I want to spend the day with him because, like, as much as, if I was able to bring him back to life and I'd say, hey, look at this player, look at that player, look at this player. You think you could beat that player? Like, you think you get a home run off that pitcher?
I think I'd just make him take batting practice against like a modern pitcher just to see what it looks
I would
like.
I'd like to spend some time with him.
Yeah.
And hear about his life too, because, back when you were playing in those days, like I don't know how much he was making, $5,000 or.
He made more than that because he became he made more than the president one year. It was like $120,000 or something. And they're like, hey, do you think you deserve that? And he's like, well, I had a better year than the president. I think it was like Herbert Hoover, Woodrow Wilson.
Great.
I don't remember.
Yeah, so he's just somebody that fascinates me, and I want to hear more about his story.
He does have a super interesting life though, because I believe he was an orphan too.
Yes,
he grew up as an orphan, and he got into baseball because somebody who worked with the Orioles like basically took custodianship over him, like kind of like an old school a blindside situation where like Babe Ruth became this. Yeah, it's a super interesting life.
Right.
Can I give one real quick?
Go ahead.
Ollie.
I think Muhammad Ali was.
I think if you could sit down with him even for just an hour and be in the presence of greatness just for an hour and hear stories from him and hear it from his actual mouth, and you would get the passion, and you would get so much insight. It would be amazing. It'd be like the greatest day ever. Literally.
All right, I've got one for you. We've got we've only got like 30 seconds. Would you rather have a big wedding with a huge party, but you have to take your honeymoon somewhere local, or you get married in a local? I mean, like in the country.
Yeah.
Not Hawaii. Or you get married in a courthouse, but you can go anywhere you want for your honeymoon.
I want the big wedding.
You want the big wedding?
Big ceremony. I want all my friends there. I want all my people there, and I will find a way to convince the new wife that we're going to watch the St. Louis Cardinals play in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh for the honeymoon for Mr. Andrew Rogers. We'll be back tomorrow to wrap up your week here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.